Good afternoon. My name is James Little, and I'd like to describe some work that David Sparkman and I did on the unknown identification of a white powder using the KnowItAll Wiley software. In particular, we used the adaptive mass spec and infrared search on this real-world example. The adaptive search is something that's come about from Wiley in the last year. It's a very exciting new software application that allows you to identify things that you couldn't identify with the standard identity search. KnowItAll is a vendor-neutral integrated solution for identifying unknowns. It uses a variety of techniques. Today we'll discuss the infrared and the mass spec applications for identifying unknowns, but it does many others also. The supported file formats are greater than 170, which allows different manufacturers' data formats to be imported for processing. The structured drawing program is ChemWindows, which is incorporated within the software. But probably one of the most important parts of it is the large number of reference spectra that can be employed in the identification of unknowns, and also the ability to create user libraries. We've imported the GCMS file in the EI mode into KnowItAll for processing, and you can see that I've averaged across the peak over at the top of the peak, and in the bottom pane shows the EI mass spectrum of the unknown. Before I show you the results that you would have gotten in the adaptive mass spec search for this unknown, I want to look at the more standard identity search that one would normally employ before the adaptive search was available. You can see on the top we have the EI mass spectrum of the unknown, and in the bottom we have the reflection of it showing the best hit that it got from the identity search. And you'll notice that it's this compound up in the right corner. Well, if you look at the hit quality index, the HQI value, you can see it's much below 70. And in general, when you get down in this range, usually the results that you get are not indicative of any useful information about the unknown. The KnowItAll adaptive search finds similar compounds where a molecular fragment is absent or present in the reference spectrum compared to the unknown. The presence or absence is designated by its delta mass value, and it's the difference of the nominal molecular weight of the known versus the reference. Peaks in the unknown spectrum compared to the reference spectrum are shifted by this delta mass, and the hybrid hit quality index value reflects both the shifted and the unshifted peaks. The results are that the adaptive search routinely yields useful results not found with the more traditional similarity search if the component is not present in the reference libraries. Thus, this greatly extends the dynamic range of all your reference and even user libraries. Here are the results for the adaptive search, and you'll see the best hit in the right-hand corner. And if you go look at the results in the bottom, it has a hit quality index of 80.7. And you'll see that the delta mass is 16. If you're trying to think of the difference between what your compound might be that weighs 248 and this one that weighs 232, 16, you might jump to the idea that it's oxygen if you're a chemist, because that would be a logical addition to the structure to get up to 248. And if you didn't know what the replacements or additions might be, this column gives you some ideas here. If you want to understand how this spectrum here, this reference spectrum, was generated for the adaptive search, you can go to the delta M info to get a picture of what's happening. It tells you it's been shifted by 16. The top is the unknown, and the bottom is the reference spectrum of that amide that had a molecular weight of 232. To get the spectrum to search, what the software does, it shifts all the ions that are appropriately shifted by 16 from, for example, 232 to 248, and shows them with a dotted line. However, there are some ions in the spectrum that should not be shifted in their mass to charge value, but just transposed with their original value up to here, ones that wouldn't be shifted by the delta mass as determined by the software. And you can see that the 175 is just transposed to the middle spectrum. But the main thing to note is that this middle spectrum is the one it does the search to determine the hit quality index, and that's why you get the very good match. If you match this one on the bottom versus an identity search, it'd be a very poor match. On this slide, I've summarized the top 3 hits in the adaptive EI mass spec search for the unknown. As we've seen in the first slide, we had this one that we saw a delta mass of 16 that indicated that it should have an oxygen inserted somewhere, which we proposed might be between the carbonyl and the CH2 group. We have this other one with a delta mass 72 for one of the hits that indicates that the central part of the molecule is here, only differing by the presence of this carboethoxy group added. And then we have this other structure with a delta mass of 4 that has a trimethylsilyl group replaced by a phenyl. So as the case for a lot of adaptive searches, you often get 3 to 5 hits in the search that tell you something about the molecule, and you have to kind of merge them together to get a proposed structure. So if we merge this one, we have to put an oxygen in for the one on the left. The middle one, we use the central part of the molecule. And for this one, we went with the carboethoxy group being attached to the nitrogen. Of course, in mass spec, EI mass spectrometry data, one cannot tell exactly that the position might not be on this NH here as opposed to this NH here, but from some of the fragmentation data and from the fact that it did line up across with the 3 proposed, we went with the proposed structure with the carboethoxy group on the carbamate being at this location. But in addition, we do have infrared data for this solid, and here is the infrared spectrum of it. It does somewhat match our proposed structure. We can see this carboethoxy group that's on a carbamate. It's the right frequency for that absorption. We also expect to see some CH and CH2's absorptions in the range of 3,000, but it was kind of strange to see this large lump here between 2,900 down to around 2,400 that wasn't easily explained by the GCMS structure. The nice thing about the KnowItAll software is that the infrared data easily does mixtures. You just have to guess how many might be there. Well, it definitely looks like it's not pure, so we don't want to do a single search. So we decided to do a search for at least 2 compounds. You can do up to 5. And what it does, it goes through the database and tries to fit the data to the least residual when it tries to match up all the reference spectra to the unknown. And so we did that, and then we go to look at the results from that infrared search. And we can see from the right-hand corner, it thinks that it probably has the carboethoxy group for the carbamate, which we thought we saw is consistent with our mass spec data. But it also sees this hydrochloride salt. But of course, when you're doing infrared data, you're not really exactly looking for exact structures in many cases. You're looking for features in the compounds present that would give you an idea of what your unknown might be. Well, it did find our carboethoxy, and it says it's a salt. But let's look at the individual spectra that it used in determining this for this fit. It picked this ester or carbamate here, and you can see the carbonyl frequency matches up real well in the absorption for it. And it also has some of the fine structure we expected in this part, but it doesn't really explain this large absorption here in this range in the spectrum. So, but if we look at the other compound it picked up, the salt, now the salt starts to explain this large lump that occurs between around 2,900 to 2,400, indicating the presence of a salt, and also some of the other frequencies down at lower frequencies confirm this. And what it's doing then, of course, is looking at the residual spectrum. It's always trying to minimize the residual leftover when it assumes it's a mixture of 2 compounds. So we can conclude from this data that the unknown white powder was tentatively identified as a fentanyl-related species. It's likely present as the hydrochloride in the solid, and the free base on the GC column is shown in the figure below. As we said before, it is tentatively identified, so you need additional data to get a better identification, but it was confirmed at a later date by reference spectra from another laboratory that had both infrared and mass spec that were consistent with our data, so thus we are almost positive this is the correct identification. But more importantly, I wanted to show that the adaptive search is critical in the identification process for components not found in reference EI libraries. So thus it increases the dynamic range of your current reference libraries, which is, in a sense, makes them more effective at identifying unknowns. And it also demonstrates the power of the multispectral capabilities of KnowItAll in unknown characterization to help further confirm identities made by mass spectrometry. We'd like to thank the contributors to the work, Stuart Millen for his IR expertise at Eastman Chemical Company, Michelle D'Souza, the KnowItAll product manager at Wiley, Steve Stein and his group at NIST for their EI mass spec hybrid search. The adaptive search is in many ways related to the hybrid search as described in his initial work. Thanks again for your time, and I hope that you'll find the adaptive search and KnowItAll software useful in your work. A good day.